Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. The sun's shining. It's nice outside. Made it harder to pop into the studio almost. But hey, we got a lot to cover and a lot to rant and rave and talk and go on about. This is a live show for most of you. Anyways, if you're watching there, use that comment scroll. I like those conversations. Good to see you there, Jetty. It's been a while. And James and Jordan, yes, send questions my way, comments. I don't necessarily read them all out, but I do read them all, and it helps keep things rolling. Let me know you're out there. And send them my guests' way. We got a lot to cover in the 15 minutes that I'll have her. And it's a good one today. We've got the author of Fisman's Fraud, and it's Dr. Regina Watteel. And she's covered, well, we've got a lot of hindsight finally starting to catch up on the whole COVID thing. And a lot of people backtracking, and we can't let them scurry away and get away with a lot of the stuff they fed us over that period. And I figure this book came out last fall, but it's very timely to discuss it again and bring it up there because we've got a lot of things to cover as well. Of course, there'll be the news check-in and some thoughts of my own on other things. So some news that was big for those in Calgary. I'm going to start with that. We've been watching this. We've had weeks, a record breaker of public hearings. Nearly 1,000 people came out to Calgary City Hall in person to express their feelings on the blanket rezoning plan. Didn't matter. Calgary's mayor and city council voted yesterday 9-6 to impose the blanket rezoning on the city. Even though 70% of those who presented in person opposed the rezoning, 90% of the thousands of submissions that were put in from citizens opposed the rezoning. And the council, they never campaigned on rezoning. It didn't matter. They don't care what citizens think. And the snide attitudes of some of those council members made it pretty clear. Hurrah, if you're a Calgarian, you know who I'm talking about. He's a special piece of work. But they got a few other clowns on there worthy of your derision as well. In a sense, what Mayor Gondek and her supporters on city council said to Calgarians as well. What are you going to do about it? It's a valid question. What can citizens do about it? I mean, clearly the mayor and council don't care what people think between elections. And they have no fear, of being able to pursue their own personal agendas, even if they don't match the wishes of the citizens who put them there in the first place. That's why I support having citizens-initiated recall and referendum legislation. And citizens should have their means to at least hold elected officials accountable between elections. I mean, there's a case to be made against having such election legislation. They say we can remove elected officials every few years in a general election, and we should just live with our choice for the duration of their term, come hell or high water. It's fair enough and debatable, I guess. What isn't debatable, though, is that Alberta's current legislation for recall and citizens-initiated referendum is utterly worthless. It was purposely crafted by the Kenney government to be unworkable. Kenney needed to fulfill a campaign promise, but he didn't really want to arm citizens with the power to remove elected officials. So when they passed the Recall Act in 2022, his government ensured that the bars set to invoke a recall were set impossibly high. So there was a recent effort to recall Calgary Mayor Gondek, and it demonstrated how useless the legislation is. I mean, polls have indicated Gondek is the least popular mayor in Calgary's history. Despite that, though, a recall effort initiated by Calgarian Land in Johnston barely managed to get over 10% of the required citizens to start the recall process going. And there was hundreds of volunteers working around the city to do it. On top of that, even if Johnston's petition had somehow reached the ridiculously high 514,000 signatures required, which is more than people voted in the entire election, by the way, a technicality found by City of Calgary bureaucrats rendered the signatures of the petition to be apparently 100% invalid. The language of the act is confusing and offers all sorts of hurdles on top of simply getting the signatures. So apparently there wasn't a little notice that was attached to the sheets of the petition. So those 69,000 signatures were 100% invalid, according to city bureaucrats. What a joke. So, even if he'd lowered it, I don't think they'd gotten enough to effectively recall somebody. It should be a last resort, but we got to have that resort in our tool belt to hold these politicians accountable. Many other democratic jurisdictions have effective recall legislation. We don't need to reinvent the wheel to find a bar that's acceptable. Alberta's referendum legislation is just as useless as the recall rules, by the way. The bar has been set ridiculously high. Nobody's going to manage to invoke one, and it's not binding on the government, even if a referendum was, brought about by a citizen. So this mess now lands on Premier Danielle Smith's lap to either fix it or ignore it. Now, Smith appears to be on a mission to make municipal councils accountable, and that's great. The problem is, though, Premier Smith wants them to be accountable to her government rather than directly to citizens. I mean, do we really need to make it easier for the provincial government to fire municipal officials or shoot down municipal bylaws? I mean, they can already do those things if they have to. It's just not easy. Wouldn't it make more sense just to empower citizens to fire these guys and initiate plebiscites to deal with bad bylaws? I mean, again, with a reasonable bar set. But no government wants to empower citizens to fire elected officials because they don't want to see that power potentially turned against themselves. So they'll pay lip service to policies like recall and referenda, but they have no interest in actually giving citizens the real ability to do that. But I hold some optimism. Danielle Smith has been different than most of the political leaders we've seen in the last couple of decades. She's not afraid to swim upstream or rock the boat. And if any premier might show the courage to fix Alberta's rotten recall and referendum legislation, it would be her. She's going to have to be encouraged, though. I mean, the UCP government already has a lot of irons in the fire. So citizens need to quit wasting time trying to pressure Calgary's mayor and city council. Gondek and her gang clearly don't care what you think. Energy needs to be directed at having the provincial government amend Alberta's terrible recall and referendum legislation. If 1,000 people can come out to City Hall in Calgary to talk about something, if 70,000 can sign a petition to recall a mayor, surely a few thousand of you can contact your MLAs and say, hey, fix that legislation. I mean, citizens need to show they're serious and want to have that. They got to get out and fire these guys when the real election comes along. But along the way, we can fix this legislation. Alberta's going to be holding municipal elections next year. And we're notoriously apathetic at voting time. Why should elected officials care what citizens think between elections if citizens don't even bother themselves to vote at election time? We do have the democratic tools at our disposal, guys. We can affect the change, but we haven't been using them effectively. If Calgary and Edmonton city councils both get wiped out in next year's election, you can rest assured the provincial government's going to suddenly feel inspired to keep the rest of us happy. It's up to us, guys. It always was, and it always will be, and it is right now. So get out there. Use those tools and encourage them. Okay, that's what got me ranting and raving today. Let's go further and see what else is going on to get me all wound up and talk to our news editor, Dave Naylor, for an update. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
It's going well, Cory. How are you?
Not bad. It's nice. I've
never seen 9 politicians commit career suicide before.
Well, that's is if people get off their asses and vote. So I'm not sure if it's suicide yet. It should be.
Well, yeah, it should be, but Calgarians are pretty apathetic, aren't they?
We can be.
So I hear you had Monday, you had a difficult experience.
Which difficult experience on Monday? Oh, that. Oh, God. Yeah, I tweet these things. I should expect you to bring them up. Yes, I had my annual physical. And this is one of the things that we talk about, cruelty to patients. When you're sitting in that room waiting for the doctor to come along, I understand being efficient and being prepared. But do they have to have the KY sitting next to the gown so you can sit there and stare at it for half an hour just to build that anticipation on what you have to enjoy as a 50-some-year-old man during the physical? I'm all clear and in good health, by the way. I'm glad you were paying attention to that.
Well, I certainly was. When you're talking about Vaseline and all sorts of stuff like that, it tends to attract my attention, Cory, as you know.
Well, it's irresistible. I mean, I can't talk all politics all the time, can I?
No, exactly. But hey, what a busy morning we've had today at the Western Standard World headquarters here in Calgary. We're leading off right now with a Mike Thomas column on last night's shenanigans at City Hall. He's talking about democracy be damned, and obviously you can tell by the headline what he thinks about that. We've also got a Wenzel column from one of the Calgary home builders, Shane Wenzel, on what he thinks about it, and it's a pretty good column too. We've got some good video of some crazy motorcyclists going down Coach Howell Trail, doing wheelies, and basically just sort of generally making asses of themselves on the weekend. So that's up there right now. Political assassination attempt in Europe today, Cory, when the Prime Minister of Slovakia was gunned down while visiting well-wishers in the street. A 71-year-old suspect being arrested, and the Prime Minister multiple gunshot wounds in hospital in critical condition. Good news, Cory, for when you're traveling to BC in this summer, and if you want to take a ferry, they're going to have all gender washrooms now. They're going to get rid of male and female washrooms and all gendered, and men will be able to get menstrual products while they're on board those ships. And our Jonathan Bradley's just wrapping up a press conference with the Premier on the state of the wildfire situation in Fort Mac. a very tense situation up there, and we'll have all the latest on that. And Cory, I'm just reading through a report from ACERT, the police watchdog in Alberta. They were investigating a police shooting in Edmonton, which an officer shot and killed somebody. Interesting report. ACERT says they thought there might have been enough there to charge the officer with homicide, but the Crown Prosecutor's Office said they declined to prosecute. So I'll have that story up as quick as I can.
Great. Well, it's interesting to know with the BC ferries. I don't plan on going out there, but my nether regions are a little tender. I mean, free man ponds might have been handy the other day. You never know. I mean, these are public services.
Well, it's there for you if you need it.
Well, comforting to know the tax dollars are hard at work on the important things. All right. Well, thanks. I'll let you get back to covering. Well, I mean, there's a lot going on, all the fires and everything else too. So we'll check in with you after the show then.
Thanks, Cory.
Right on. Thanks, Dave. So that is our news editor, Dave Naylor. As you see, yes, lots of stuff. We're different than some of the other sites, guys. We have an active full newsroom. We have a cadre of reporters. We are covering things. The stories are popping up as they happen. And the reason we can do that, this is where I make my pitch, but it's important, is because you guys have subscribed. We don't take tax dollars, and we won't. And it keeps us independent. It allows us to speak to these issues without pressure from the government, without dependency on the government. So lots of you guys have subscribed. That's why we've got such a great group here and all this going on. It's $9.99 a month, $100 a year. It's well worth it. If you haven't subscribed yet, come on down, guys. It's take it up. It's well worth it. It's just like a newspaper subscription in the past. And hey, if you got a company you're considering advertising, give us a shout. Warren would be happy to speak to you about that. So yes, lots on the go going on out there. Where to begin? Before I get to my next guest, I just want to talk briefly on something that popped up. I like to cover some of these stories. It's just kind of a sidetrack on things, but a story that came out from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. This is when it gets down to people wanting simple solutions to complex problems. There's two areas I think that are big ones when it comes to that. One's rent control, which never works, no matter how much you try. People think if we could just control the rent, we'll keep everybody's rent low. The problem is it doesn't work. It's sunshine and lollipops. I wish it worked. If it worked, I'd say let's do it. But they try it all over the place. What it does is leads to reduced supply, which leads in the end to higher rent or at least lower availability. Hey, it's great if your rent is controlled and low in your area, but if you can't get into a house, you're kind of screwed, aren't you? But the other one is minimum wages. And people keep thinking if we can just raise minimum wages high enough, we'll get rid of poverty. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. If it was that simple, why haven't they raised the minimum wage in Guatemala and made them all rich there yet? Why is there still a whole huge problem? California, I think they raised it to $20 an hour, which those are real dollars. Those are the American dollars, not the Canadian peso. And they still have people fleeing California because of the high cost of living. And the other thing is the myth with people saying the amount of people dependent on minimum wages. You see in Alberta right now, we're booming and inflation's going high. It's hard to find labor. So the researchers found in Canada, the amount of minimum wage workers, because we always talk about it being single parents and such. Well, it turns out 1.5% of minimum wage earners are single parents. It's not a big portion of it. 37% of the people earning minimum wage are teenagers. They're entry-level wages, and if they're any good, they're going to go up fast. 57% of the minimum wage earners are under 25. And again, it's going to rise fast. It's hard to find good people. If they're good workers, if they're learning skills, if they're reliable, rest assured, they're not going to stay. Alberta's minimum wage, I think, is $15 an hour right now. It's going to go up fast. We want to address poverty. The way to do it is to get a stronger economy. That's the way to do it. Artificial measures, increasing minimum wages just doesn't help. Again, if it worked, I'd be all for it. If it was that simple, if it was that beautiful, everybody could be living comfortably and paying all their bills if we could just raise that arbitrary number high enough. But it doesn't work. The stats are there. And I'm going to segue that into my next guest, Dr. Regina Watteel, because I do believe she's a statistician, and these stats are important. This is how we learn things. This is how we realize what is working and what isn't working. And also, of course, when the wool's being pulled over your eyes. So thank you very much for coming to join the show today, Doctor, and I appreciate your book.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me on your show, Cory.
So your book, I mean, I'll just let you start it off kind of, on the premise of what it's about. It's called Fisman's Fraud, the rise of Canadian hate science. Hate science, it's an an interesting term you've coined for it, but it works. Can you kind of explain what motivated you to write the book, and just in a nutshell what the book's on?
Oh goodness, what motivated me? Well, that's a tough one because there's been a lot of shenanigans during the pandemic and a lot of fraud, and I've been fighting this since day one. But basically, I came across, well, everybody came across an overtly fraudulent piece of research that targeted unvaccinated individuals and scapegoated them. And basically, I knew right then and there I had to do my best to take it down. So basically, my book dispels the pandemic of the unvaccinated narrative. It shows that it's purely political and that it was propped up by fraudulent science. And it focuses on a particular case of scientific fraud that was committed by University of Toronto professors. The main author of the scientific research was David Fisman. He has basically been Canada's frontman for pandemic modeling. He is a tenured professor at the University of Toronto. He's also a physician. And he has advised all levels of government, from municipal to provincial to federal, during the pandemic. And basically what happened with their study was that when the pandemic, when it was shown that the pandemic of the unvaccinated narrative was false, that it completely broke down, this was after Omicron, the researchers at the University of Toronto basically concocted a model that simulated fake data to show that unvaccinated people had higher incident rates than vaccinated individuals, and as such were a disproportionate risk to others. And then they tried to pass off their fake data and their fake results as a true reflection of reality, even though official Government of Ontario data showed basically the opposite. And then from there was a big media frenzy warning everybody of the risks of merely hanging out with the unvaccinated.
Well, yeah, and that's part of what really got to me, was this social division that they sowed with this agenda. I mean, not just the study, but the other people who followed up on it. I mean, the vaccinations were initially sold, at least with the case being made that this is going to prevent transmission. And we found out pretty quickly, once they were being applied, whatever, I mean, we can debate the benefits or whether they reduce symptoms or not or whatever, but they did not have any impact on the transmissibility of that, which should have, with rational, moral people, said, well, we can't keep yelling at people that they're putting everybody else at risk or in danger, and we shouldn't be trying to segregate people or pressure people saying, you're going to kill my grandmama if you don't get vaccinated, because the vaccines did nothing to stop the transmission. Right there, the narrative should have changed, but instead, they doubled down.
Yeah, they doubled down on it because it's a real problem for the government if it doesn't curtail transmission. Mandates don't make sense. The mandates don't make sense. The passports don't make sense. The travel restriction, nothing they did makes sense when it comes to the restrictions they put in place. So they're doing everything they can to double down. Even now, they've doubled down on that narrative. They've never admitted they were wrong, and they're still saying the same thing.
And it's been difficult to get those discussions out. Like when we were doing our productions at that time, if I mentioned the word vaccine on YouTube, we'd be punted off the channel. We could, if we wanted to maintain our ability to keep broadcasting, it was a no-go area for us. We had to talk around in circles to avoid the algorithms. It was just brutal. Like, why were they so afraid of discourse on what should be such an important issue?
Well, when it comes to transmission, they've basically set things up, I believe, to bring in mandates in the future. And so they don't want to back down on their narrative. And what happened with the Fisman study is Fisman and his colleagues, they basically committed an overt textbook case of scientific fraud to prop up these mandates and restrictions. And the issue is that when I tried to get the paper retracted, instead of admitting there was a problem, the journal, the Canadian Medical Association journal, would not retract the article, even though dozens of scientists rebuked the findings. The University of Toronto backed it, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, they're standing by it. So now you have that top institutions are basically complicit in this fraud, which makes it really bad for them because it is provable. And when you show that institutions are willing to commit fraud to scapegoat a segment of the population, then that segment requires protections. And basically that's what I'm trying to do with this book is force protections for, based on vaccine choice and medical choice.
Well, yeah, and medical choice is essential. And I mean, what we're seeing now, and it's been frustrating to me, is because of the deception, because of the forcefulness of it. I mean, so much trust has been broken with people. We're seeing tried and true vaccines. People are refusing to take them now. We're seeing whooping cough reappearing. We're seeing measles reappearing because these guys shoved these unproven vaccines down the throats of Canadians. What I worry about, as you said, we should be looking though down the road in case there's another pandemic of another sort. People won't take up it. Maybe a real vaccine would come up, maybe something dangerous that is transmissible and there is a vaccine that stops it, but people aren't going to take it because they aren't going to believe the government that refused to at least acknowledge what they learned this time around.
Oh, for sure. They've done what they've done for vaccination is horrific. They are responsible for people not wanting to get regular vaccines, but not just vaccination. The reputation of science itself, statistics, epidemiology, the reputation of a lot of things has gone down because of this pandemic. And legal too. The justice system, people don't have faith in the justice system. It's in a terrible state when you have trusted organizations outright fabricating and lying to citizens.
Well, and we got fortunate as far as any kind of pandemic will go. And again, speaking of statistics, people can look at that. I mean, one of the ways they'd love to shut it down, if you're not a medical doctor, you shouldn't be able to speak on this. Oh, kiss my butt. We've got to be able to speak on that. We got to look at these numbers. And one of the things that was pretty clear very early was healthy people under the age of 40, the chances of them actually being permanently harmed by COVID, thankfully, were next to none. I mean, the numbers bore that out. They bore it out during the time, and they more so even now. Yet you don't hear them talking about that. We pretended this was going to impact everybody, and it didn't, which again makes a dangerous environment for perhaps an outbreak that comes down the road that is much more dangerous because people aren't going to believe them.
Well, you're exactly right. Right away, in March of 2020, it was shown at that time that most individuals were not at serious risk of COVID-19 complications at that time. And right away, the government acted in a direction that was opposite of what the data was saying. So when I looked at it at that time, I was really worried because there was really no reason, even in the beginning, to do the lockdowns, the school closures, and whatnot. But that's what they did right away. And they didn't correct. They didn't self-correct when it was obvious they were wrong. They just kept on going.
Yeah, and now that as well as time is passing, I mean, a big turning point. And that's where I thought, oh boy, I want to get her on here to talk more about this because finally people are looking back and realizing, like, was the AstraZeneca now? Kind of admitting we haven't seen numbers, we haven't seen what's gone on, but I mean, this must be pretty serious. What they're saying is a rare side effect that can seriously harm people with their vaccine. Bad enough that at least that they felt it's time to pull that right off the market. When we were told for so long that these vaccines were virtually harmless, when we're seeing them pulling it off the market, I think some alarm bells should be going off here.
The alarm bells should be going off, but at least here in Canada, they haven't really admitted to anything. They're saying it's for other reasons. And even though it looks like some progress is being made, the people that are in charge of everything, they haven't changed course at all. They haven't even changed course when it comes to the transmission. They're still trying to say that there's some benefit when there just simply isn't. When you look at even Fisman Study, he just did an update last month, and they're still clinging to the same narrative, and they're clinging to that the unvaccinated pose a threat when it's clear they didn't. And then when it comes to safety, they're even less likely to admit they were wrong because that will be extremely problematic to them. So even though the information is getting out there. Has been no course correction, really. I mean, this is a good sign with AstraZeneca, but it's not near enough.
No, and something else. I mean, I've been watching the numbers for the people. I mean, they're still advertising. They're still pushing, get your boosters. I don't know. Some people are getting up to their 6th or 7th booster or wherever the heck they are. But most people have stopped. I mean, the numbers of people who have bothered following up with boosters any longer is virtually nil, at least the non-vulnerable people, the younger people. So they always said that we'd have to keep doing this for years. We'd have to keep these boosters or this never is going to go away. Well, it's gone away, despite nobody taking the boosters or next to nobody. So, I mean, the bottom line is this thing just had to run its course.
Well, it did, but the issue is obviously they keep talking about the next pandemic and the next emergency. So unless we change what they've set up, we may find ourselves in this position again with these ridiculous restrictions. And basically that the government has shown that they can just toss our rights and freedoms aside. So unless we put protections in, I think we will see it again. And there's a lot, like I am, like today I was feeling pretty positive that we're making some progress because there are more discussions going on, and there's a lot of things going on in the background that I know with a lot of people. So we're working hard to put protections in place. So I'm really hoping we'll get somewhere.
Well, that's good. I mean, another thing that happened throughout the course of this too, and the numbers just didn't bear it up. And that's why I don't think, statisticians and people should be dismissed. It's very important. We were always warned about super spreader situations every time, whether it was the Sylvan Lake Beach in Alberta or even the rodeo that the Western Standard sponsored during the pandemic. And we were all accused, you're going to kill everybody. It's going to be a super spreader event. Thousands of people are going to be traced with infections to these events. It never happened. From hockey games to rodeos to people going to the beach. That just didn't happen.
Right. But the thing is that you're correct. More statisticians need to step up, because pandemic science really has been about the manipulation of statistics to get people to comply and do what they're told. Like from day one, it's all been about, it's a statistical game really. And the numbers, the real numbers and the real science was never on the side of these restrictions and the way the government has acted. So the issue, of course, is that the justice system doesn't seem to be open to actual evidence. And a lot of times they go on expert opinion as opposed to provable facts. I'm hoping one day we can actually show the evidence, because you can show the fraud. You can prove the fraud based on basic principles of science. I can do it with Fisman. I can show other examples of fraud. Right now, I'm looking at some of the things done here by the Ontario Science Table, showing how they fudged numbers to basically put the screws to the working unvaxxed. These things actually are not that difficult to prove. We're just being blocked from proving it.
Yeah, and it's very frustrating. I mean, just if nothing else out of this whole few years, what I want to see is that we learned something. I fear two outcomes that have happened from all this deception. I mean, one is that either a relatively minor pandemic of some sort like COVID is going to come along, and yes, the government's just going to feel empowered to come in and step on our rights and infringe on us all over again if we haven't learned from it. Or it could be the next zombie apocalypse, and it's something terribly dangerous, but nobody's going to trust the restrictions or the distancing or anything because of what happened the last time, and we'll have a worse infection than we would have endured. So we've really got to look at this with an unvarnished eye and come at it better in the future. Oh,
for sure. You're not going to get an argument from me with that one. And you're correct. It could go either way. I got to say that my trust in the establishment is completely gone. I see too much corruption, and I see too much abuse. So all I'm going to do is try to set the record straight, and one day at a time make progress. So,
well, you've certainly put your effort in to do so, and I appreciate that. And with your book, so I mean, before I let you go, where can people find you? I know you have a busy online presence, and of course, you have your book available. Where can people get a copy?
Well, people can get a copy on Amazon, Indigo. Vets for Freedom also carries it if people don't want to go through the major chains. I'm pretty active on Twitter, but that's about it because it's really hard to keep up on all the different social media platforms. So I usually just make tweets. Right now, I'm working on several things in the background. So, I mean, I want people to realize that there is progress being made. I've been very fortunate with this book in that I've been on podcasts and certainly being on Redacted really helped with the exposure. And because of that, I've been able to get this book into the hands of dozens of MPs and a senator. I'm also doing other things, like I mentioned in the background, with some of the updates that have gone on with Fisman and others. And so things are moving along in the right direction, even though I have to say that the government so far has not changed course. And there does seem to be an effort to keep information that goes against the narrative from actual MPs and others. Just one thing that came out is my book was mentioned in the House of Commons, and there was even an order paper question about the funding of the study. And anybody who reads my book, and I also put out a supplementary that shows all the email and letter correspondence with CIHR and CMAJ, so people know what I sent them. So there was an order paper question that went to CIHR asking whether they received any negative feedback about this study, and they came back recently and said no. And so right on the order paper question in the House, that's an outright lie. And now it comes to like what's going on. Like, are they trying to keep information from these politicians so the politicians can claim they don't know? Like, it's very. I think we have to get to the bottom of it for sure. So I'm working on that, and there's also the big question as to how this whole media frenzy came out when this study was published. That it went to, I think over 90 media outlets, and over 100 articles were written right away. And who orchestrated that? Because it's very unusual for a scientific study to get that level of exposure. And as you know, when the study came out, it was timely because, the Liberal government was trying to find science to justify extending its mandates and travel restrictions. So there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered that we still need to find the answers for.
Well, we appreciate your work and your book and your ongoing work. So thank you very much for coming on to talk to us about it today. And I look forward to hopefully at least trying to mitigate the harm in the next time this sort of thing happens. So thanks again, and then perhaps we'll talk again soon.
Oh, thank you very much, Cory. I appreciate this. Thank you.
Thanks. So again, one more time, folks, if you want to get that book, and it's a good one, Fisman's Fraud by Dr. Regina Watteel. And yes, watch for her on Twitter and online. She's still at it. It's not like she just put out a book and quit. We've got to learn from this. We've got to, we can't make a positive. You can't change the past, but you can stop yourself from repeating it if you look carefully at what happened and don't do it again. I'm going to tell a little story on here. I think I might have told it on here before, but I know we've got a lot of new viewers. And it starts out kind of weird and crude, but bear with me. I'm getting somewhere with it. Back in the early 80s, I was a young, inquisitive kid like any other one. And I'd poke around. Kids get into everything. In my father's golf bag, I found a Hustler magazine. Yeah, real high-end stuff. But the funny thing was I was a little dork. I was a strange kid. I didn't just look at the pictures, which of course were fascinating to me. I read they had articles in there. And they had an article actually that was called The Gay Cancer. This was in 82 or 83 or something. A strange term, a crude one. But actually that was a story about a disease that was sweeping the gay community on the lower West Coast in California, and it was killing them all over the place. And people were getting worked up. They were wondering what the heck's going on. But nobody in mainstream media was talking about it. Nobody would touch it. Yet Hustler covered it, of all magazines. And doctors eventually changed the name of it, actually, and they called it Gay Acquired Immune Deficiency, which got evolved quickly to AIDS. And that's what it was. But the first reports of all places you're hearing about it were in a porn magazine. And I'm not saying that Larry Flint is a good man. He's a gross porn hustling pervert. But it's sad. There was something socially sensitive. We won't talk about the science, because there's what happened. Rock Hudson, that was the turning point. Rock Hudson is diagnosed with AIDS. He dies, and suddenly it becomes a mainstream thing, and everybody's talking about it. But what the media did and the world did, and everybody turned around and said, this is everybody's disease. We've got to, and when I graduated high school by the end of the 80s, we were told every hetero person's going to know another hetero person who's HIV positive. This is where it's going. And we've got to do our preventative measures to make sure everybody, because again, people were fearful socially of speaking up about where the disease was actually hitting. It's not a prejudice to point out the reality. Was when that disease was emerging, and all the way through the course of it, it was predominantly among gay men and intravenous drug users. It's not actually that easy a disease to transmit, thankfully. But still, it was devastating to those communities. It was terrible. And if we'd have properly dedicated, though, our resources and looked at where it's really hitting, spend that money to work on educating the gay community and reduce the amount of people who died and got infected because we were sitting there wasting money chasing after heterosexual high school kids when it was actually gay men we should be targeting to save their lives. We wasted the resources, though, pretending it's everybody's disease. Doesn't it sound familiar, though? When the early rumblings, like I was talking about before with Regina, about we knew it was senior citizens, we knew it was vulnerable people, we knew it was diabetics, we knew it was obese people, that COVID is hurting, and it's not harming the others. So why pretend that it's everybody's disease? Instead, we should focus on who's most vulnerable, because when we do that, we can better reduce the onslaught and the problems from it. So, I mean, you know, it never changed. I mean, the AIDS still remained, and we've gotten it much under control compared to how it was, thank God. But we could have done a heck of a lot better job if people had actually paid attention to it. And again, statistically, looking at really who it's hitting and how and why. But we let political agendas and political correctness guide our treatment of that terrible disease with COVID and AIDS. And it cost lives. Let's look at it realistically. That's why I was saying, let's talk to statisticians. Let's look at the numbers. That's what gives us the tale, especially when we have hindsight. So if emerging diseases come out in the future, let's look at who it's hitting and let's target who's most vulnerable. Let's hope it's not everybody. But I'm sick of media and experts and others pretending every disease is everybody's problem. It's not. We really should have done more to protect our seniors during the point of COVID, to protect people with other comorbidities. We had the numbers very early and even to the end. Kids were virtually immune. They should have still been going to school. We had something where the best things you could do is get out and into fresh air. What would they do? They were closing playgrounds, the morons. They were assaulting kids playing hockey who were never at risk. Literally, we saw that in Calgary with the cops tackling a kid for daring to play on an outdoor rink, for doing a healthy outdoor activity, healthy socially and physically. That's how stupid we were through this. Stupid. So let's learn from it. Let's learn from it. And yeah, keep your alternate media going, because like I said, to give the little bit of credit to Hustler, aside from their pornographic images, they were actually one of the first magazines with the courage to at least even report on this issue. This should have been reported in mainstream magazines and newspapers years before that, but nobody had the courage because they were too scared of social issues. Well, alternative media was actually helping people in some ways, and it was helping lonely men as well. But back in those days, and now alternative media is here. And the Western Standard doesn't put pornographic images up, but we will talk about issues that the mainstream media is afraid to. So Dave mentioned ACERT earlier when he was giving the news update and protests on protests and things like that. Or the cops shooting. That's the Alberta serious incident reporting. It's when there's a police incident that gets violent. And it looks like now we're hearing talk with the protests that got torn down in Calgary and Edmonton. Israel, like Alberta, is leading the country in something. These I'll be kind enough to call them pro-Palestine, but in reality, they're typically now pro-Hamas. I mean, they're celebrating October 7th. It's disgusting. But either way, these university protests were setting up, and Alberta got up and said, no, that's not happening. And within a week, I think it took 2 weeks in Edmonton, it took like 3 days in Calgary, the police moved in and they removed the encampments. They said, no, it's not happening, not going to go on in here. The universities asked police to come in because it's private property. But now we got the backlash. We got Premier Smith saying, yeah, we're going to have ACERT have a look because we heard there were some injuries. You know, there was this doctor online who showed the most pathetic. If you look at my Twitter account online at Cory B. Morgan, you'll see it. I shared them a few days ago. These little scratches on people. The police beat them. Oh, good Lord, really? Ah, man, my mother did more with a wooden spoon if I did something wrong in the 80s. This is police abuse. These guys were told they were setting up fences around their encampments. They were building pallets. There's the pictures I took right there from University of Calgary. And for the people who are just listening to the audio version, there's a wall of pallets these guys actually built around their little encampment. This is like on day 2. They took trucks right into the middle of the university campus and built a camp and put a wooden wall around it. How do you think it's going to get easier to get rid of these jerks if you leave them? They were entrenching. They were digging in. They were getting ready for battle. The police warned them over and over and over again. Said, get out of here. We're removing your camp. You're trespassing. It's not allowed. Anybody who didn't want to be physically removed, all they had to do was walk away. And most of them apparently did. But a bunch of them didn't because they're extremists. They're lunatics. They're Jew-hating jerks. So the police were forced to go in. And then they started throwing bottles and things at the police. And guess what? The police were dressed in riot gear and they removed them. They tore them out of there. And there was some video. Of course, they always ham it up. They play it up and scream and howl and fall on the ground and force the officers to drag them away. Wah. Friggin' wah. Wimps. You know, it's a show. But the thing is, when the politicians, the cowardly politicians, play to the show, you start losing. So even Premier Smith, though I understand she's got to be careful, saying, yeah, we're going to have ACER to have a look because maybe the police were too rough. And I listen to, I torture myself. I listen to talk radio because I do a lot of driving through the week and it gives me something to listen to and at least keeps me up on the news. But talk radio's gotten pathetic these days, pathetic. And I listened to one host who was talking to an officer about it and he kept going on about, do they have to look so militarized? Do they have to look so militarized? He said that like 5 friggin' times. What do you want, maitre d's? Should they come up, pardon me, sir, could I please ask you to leave the camp? They're not going to. These police have to wear pads. They have to wear face shields. They have to keep a shield up because these idiots are throwing rocks. Yeah, they love throwing rocks, these Gazan types, don't they? And bottles and you name it at them. They have to protect themselves. They have to stay safe. And yes, I've seen it. I've gone to protests where the police march forward and they bang their shields when they're going. And the radio host I was listening to, such an intimidation tactic. Yes, that's exactly what it is, you jerk, you moron. Because it's better to get them afraid, saying, you know what, I don't like this. I'm going to get up and I'm just going to leave rather than force the police to grab me and drag me out of here. So yes, the police do purposely intimidate. They do purposely look tough when they approach these encampments. It's for the safety of the police and it's for the safety of actually the people protesting. Because if you would just get out of the damn way, you've been warned. If you don't, then it's probably going to get a little rough. And they weren't that rough. They weren't. They got some pepper in their eyes and some flashbangs went. They disorient people. They make a big noise. They scare them and they get them out of the way. But to listen to the media talking about, like, what do you want? What do you really want? So we're supposed to let these guys set up a permanent camp sitting around there for in perpetuity. And I'll be fair. I see Linda, a commenter, saying rough police were at the truckers' convoy. That's true. That because they were also removing people who had been warned over and over and over again it was time to leave. We can debate whether or not the truckers' convoy protest should have been ordered to leave. I honestly, I've talked about this, and I know people get upset with me. I support the protest. I supported the initial part of it, but when you get these protests coming, you can't just entrench and block entire roads and stay permanently. You can't. You can't. You will force the hand of the authorities. You have to have an exit plan. At some point, you have to have reasonable demands to be met or something, because if you don't, eventually it will come to a head and you'll be removed no matter what. You can't block borders indefinitely. You can't block Parliament Hill indefinitely, and you can't set up permanent camps on university campuses. You will be removed. And when the police do it, they won't do it nicely. Thankfully, it just says a lot, though, about the truckers' convoy. When the police did move in, and there were some bad incidents with the horses and other things, but for the most part, they were sane people who realized, and they were ticked off. They didn't want to be removed, and they had to be kind of pushed back, but they didn't throw the bottles and attack the police and really cause heavy-duty riots. Part of the reason, too, though, is because you have a large police force there in the first place. We can discuss whether or not it should have been done or not. The Emergencies Act never should have been declared. That was an overreach, an overaction from a cowardly prime minister, and it was ridiculous. That didn't have to happen. But once it comes to the point, whether right or wrong, and the police have been tasked and said, look, your job now is to go in there and remove this encampment, remove these demonstrators, wherever it might be. They have to protect themselves. They have to look a little intimidating. They have to look a little militarized. And that's the way it's going to happen. just to finish, one thing that got a little bit better out of it all was a university. This is a nice one. A University of Alberta diversity official, tendered her resignation because of the treatment of students at the anti-Israel encampment. So on Saturday, this U of A Faculty of Arts Associate Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Natalie Lovelace says she witnessed violent, forcible removal of her Hamas buddies, so she has resigned. Good. Why the hell do they need this Associate Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the first place? Don't replace her. Your university just got better on 2 levels. You got rid of these idiots who were setting up a camp in the middle of the university, and you got rid of this idiot dean who had a position she didn't need to be there in the first place. Look, people are free to get out and protest day by day by day. Get up in the morning, go out, hold your signs, wave them. But when you start blocking roads, setting up camps in universities, blocking borders, you're gonna force their hand. So don't. Your rights aren't being infringed on by having an encampment removed. Either way, we'll still see that. That story is not done by a long shot. It's going to keep going on. Lots of other stories going on. Keep an eye on the Western Standard. As I said, we've got the wildfires. We've got people covering it. It's that time of year, guys. We're going to have them. And unfortunately, they're getting near populated places. People have been evacuated. And just keep coming back. So thanks for tuning in today, guys. Share those links. Keep coming to the Standard. And tune into the Pipeline tonight. We're going to cover a few more stories in depth with a panel. So thanks for tuning in this week. And I'll see you all again next week at this time.